can I take the next one? So this was my momentary nod at curating Wordsworth. And it seems to me that if he was alive, his practice would be broader than we now perceive it. Essentially, he is seen as a poet essentially in print. And then if you come to the museum or you access your fancy website, you can see the documents. But the documents really are sort of like a historical background and explanation of his writing. And if he was, I like to think, or I imagine, that if he was alive, he would be actually owning more of that, and that actually his physical writings would actually be part of his work and would be seen. So some of the things that are going to follow are going to flow in that sort of general direction. So I'm actually not going to talk about printed works because we all know what books look like.
Explain asemic.
Yes, I was just going to come to that. Yeah, that's the very it's the very next thing. Basically, this is just the frame for what's going to follow. That is actually a Wordsworth, as you probably all know. The asemic comes from there is a critical debate going on in international, especially in America and Canada, about the requirement of language to mean what it says. Essentially, for the meaning of the words to actually be transparent, and asemic actually means that the meaning of the word is not necessarily semantically important. So it could be the shape of the word means something. I mean, you could go back to some of the shape poems of, say, Lewis Carroll or something. That would be a precursor, and in contemporary, if I showed that in a contemporary text show, people would treat that as an asemic piece of work, because apart from you people who know Wordsworth's work, I don't think many people could read that. I can't read it, and that wouldn't actually matter. That wouldn't matter. Can we take the next one? Now this is an Italian artist called Marco Giovanelli, and what interested me is he's been sending me these postcards for quite some time now, with these texts, which he called asemic texts. And I actually can't read those either. And I think when you put that next to, say, the Wordsworth letters, there's a really interesting sort of visual resonance between the two pieces of work. Can we take the next one? This one is by what's called a language poet, American, called Bob Grenier, and he does 4-word poems. He's interesting in that he sits out on grassy hills in San Francisco and spends days thinking about the poem. So that obviously that sort of resonance of Wordsworth just working endlessly on the poem, and he works to find the 4 words that will. 3 minutes, blimey, we're going to go through these then. Right, so basically, and the thing about his work is that the struggle to write it is replicated in the struggle to read it, because it does actually say something, but you have to work as hard as he did to write it, to know what he said. And it seems to me there's actually a way of showing Wordsworth that actually says they're now unreadable. Next one. They're just on the wall, loads of them. Next. This is I was just going to say something about artist books, but it's not very interesting, so we'll go on. This is Kurt Schwitters was actually briefly interred in Bury before he came to the Lake District, and the cell where he was kept still actually exists. So as an interpretation, we actually got the 4 world's best performers of Schwitters' Sonata. And they performed in the space. I mean, he didn't write it there, but he was interred there. And it is online, and it's a very spectacular piece of film, so I recommend it to you. Next. This is a performative piece by Sarah Sanders, who basically took a piece of journalism that she thought was full of lies, basically, and cut out all the texts, all the words individually, all the little letters, and then as a performance piece blew them off a balcony. And it was a very beautiful thing because all these letters just drifted down. Next. This is and the next one as well. This is a piece by Pavel Butler, and it actually plays Kurt Schwitter's Sonata from the speakers, generated by a computer voice in German. So, and there's a point where you stand, where all those speakers have only at the same volume as this single one. So there's a single point there where you get a stereo effect of these hundreds of speakers only whispering it, and then the other one saying it, and so you just get stereo. Next. Interpretations of text. This is actually a neon piece by Sean Pickard, which is a neon rendering of one of Darwin's famous diagrams about how evolution works. Okay? This is a carpet in Basel, which is the text of a telegram that Buckminster Fuller sent to the Japanese-American artist Noguchi, explaining to him Einstein's theory of relativity in 240 words. And I think that's really interesting because obviously Einstein's theory is Einstein's theory, which is interpretation of the universe, but then Noguchi's is an attempt to interpret that in 240 words, and then the carpet is another interpretation again. Okay, thanks. This one is a great piece. This is by an artist called Hester Reeve, and it's Heidegger's Being and Time. As part of the first festival, she sat in the gallery for 9 weeks and hadn't read Heidegger's Being and Time. And the piece is she is reading Heidegger's Being and Time. It struck me that in these conversations we've had this sort of conversation about the reading and writing, whereas in this one, this piece, she's actually doing both. That it's the act of reading being translated directly into writing. There's a lot to say about that. We'll push on. This is just an example of poets who are starting to use the language of comics. Okay. And I'll pass that one. This was just a personal thing that I like to think that in the 21st century, perhaps Wordsworth wouldn't have been so interested in nature and be more interested in the countryside. So, and that's one of mine because I personally don't like the countryside very much. And then the last one. This is actually a piece which is an interpretation. That's an installation interpreting this text, which is a poem that I wrote. So that's sort of how I interpreted my own long poem. So there you go. Thank you.